Iran's great goal is crystal clear to anybody who cares to open their eyes. Iran seeks to dominate the region and seeks to do so under a nuclear umbrella. Iran's nuclear weapon program is at a critical point. All red lines have been crossed, inspections ignored, all wishful thinking proven false. Iran is currently violating the IAEA's safeguard agreements, and it's getting away with it. Israel is quite literally surrounded by Hezbollah, Shia militias, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas on our borders. These terror groups seek to dominate the Middle East and spread radical Islam across the world. What do they all have in common? They all want to destroy my country, and they're all backed by Iran. For the past 3 decades, Iran spread its carnage and destruction around the Middle East, country after country. Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Gaza. What do all these places have in common? Well, they're all falling apart. Their citizens hungry and suffering. Their economies collapsing. In 1988, Iran set up a death commission that ordered the mass murder of 5,000 political activists. They were hanged from cranes. The death commission was made up of 4 people. Ibrahim Raisi, Iran's new president, was one of them. Raisi also oversaw the murder of Iranian children. His nickname is the Butcher of Tehran because that's exactly what he did. He butchered his own people. One of the witnesses of this massacre stated in her testimony that when Raisi would finish a round of murder, he'd throw a party, pocketing the money of those he just executed minutes ago, and then he would sit down to eat cream cakes. He celebrated the murder of his own people by devouring cream cakes. And now this very Raisi is Iran's new president. Alongside our old friends, we're gaining new friends in the Middle East and beyond. Last week, this manifested itself with the defeat of the racist, anti-Semitic Durban Conference. This conference was originally meant to be against racism, but over the years turned into a conference of racism against Israel and the Jewish people. I want to thank the 38 countries, 38, who chose truth over lies and skipped the conference. And to those countries who chose to participate in this farce, well, I can only say, attacking Israel doesn't make you morally superior. Fighting the only democracy in the Middle East doesn't make you woke. Adopting cliches about Israel without even bothering to learn the basic facts, well, that's just plain lazy.
Latest news, Israel readying for possible Iran conflict, officials say. And Israel ups airstrikes in Syria as next step against Iran. This is the latest news. Associated Press headliner, Israel readying for possible Iran conflict, officials say. Dated November 10, 2021. Top Israeli defense officials say the country is preparing for the possibility of an armed conflict with regional arch rival Iran and its proxies. Israeli Army Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi said Tuesday that the Israeli military was speeding up the operational plans and readiness for dealing with Iran and the nuclear military threat. Israel considers Iran an existential threat and has warned that it would act with military force if needed to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Last month, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said that if a terror regime is going to acquire a nuclear weapon, we must act. Iran insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only. Tehran is set to renew nuclear talks with world powers this month after the 2015 accord to curb its nuclear program collapsed following the U.S. withdrawal from the agreement in 2018. Addressing lawmakers at a meeting of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Kohavi said the military continued to act against our enemies in covert operations and missions around the Middle East during the past year. His remarks came following a string of reported Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Israel has staged hundreds of strikes on Iran-linked military targets in neighboring Syria in the past decade, but rarely acknowledges its operations. It is said that Iran's presence near its northern frontier is a red line, that it targets arms shipments bound for Iranian-backed Lebanese militant groups Hezbollah and Iran-linked facilities in Syria. Speaking during a visit to a defense industry factory in the northern city of Shlomi, near the Lebanese border, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said that Israel was working all the time to prevent war, carrying out operations, conveying messages, preventing a military buildup. In the event of a war, he said, we will be prepared to execute operations that haven't been seen in the past, which means that weren't in our hands in the past, that will harm the heart of terror and its abilities. Jerusalem Post headliner, Israel ups airstrikes in Syria as next step against Iran. Dated November 10th, 2021. Israel has seemingly upped its war between wars campaign against Iran and Syria as the country's top officer warns that the IDF is accelerating its plans to deal with Iran's nuclear program. At least 7 airstrikes targeting Iranian and Shi'ite militias have been blamed on Israel in the past month alone. The most recent one on Monday in the Homs province, as well as targets belonging to the regime of Bashar Assad and to Iranian militias in the northwestern coastal city of Tartus. Last week, Israel was blamed for an airstrike targeting a military post on the outskirts of Damascus, and last October, 5 people were killed in another alleged Israeli airstrike in a rare daytime strike outside Damascus. While Israel may be taking advantage of the unusually clear skies during a season where there are unusually heavy clouds, it also comes weeks before Iran and the West are set to return to the negotiating table in Vienna. The indirect talks are being brokered by the European Union and aim to bring Washington and Tehran back into the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the formal title of the Iran nuclear deal that the United States left under former President Donald Trump. It is believed that Iran is continuing to develop the capabilities to produce a nuclear weapon arsenal, as well as produce ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. And with no diplomatic options likely to push Tehran to stop its nuclear program, Israel's military believes that the Islamic Republic needs to be aware that should it continue its program, it will face a military option ready to stop it. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi warned Tuesday during a meeting of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs that the IDF is accelerating its operational plans and readiness to deal with Iran. While its attack by Iranian proxies such as Hezbollah is a major concern for the IDF, it's Iran nuclear ballistic missile programs that worry Israel's defense establishment the most. I am pleased that the budget allows us to meet the range of challenges, including a significant improvement of all operational plans and procurement of training, both of the regular and of the reserve forces, Kohavi said. The state of Israel has many security challenges in 6 different arenas, he added, and also added that the IDF acts both defensively and counterattacks and offensively. In the past year, we have continued to act against our enemies, including in covert operations throughout the Middle East. As reported by the Jerusalem Post, some $5 billion of the defense budget will go extensively to Israel's MAMBAM program against Iran. The funds will be allocated to intelligence gathering capabilities, increasing the military's target banking further in training. The budget will also allow the IDF to complete other important defensive projects, such as building the wall along the border with Lebanon and implementing a permanent defensive coverage in the airspace of northern Israel. With additional fixed iron dome batteries, it would be able to shoot down incoming drones and missiles. In the past year, there have been also an increase in the number of targets struck during MAMBAM operations, with most airstrikes targeting Iranian enrichment and weapons smuggling in Syria. Operations have even occurred at sea where alleged Israeli attacks against Iranian ships have stopped an estimated $1.2 to $2 million from going to terror groups in the Middle East. That's the news and my thoughts. The Iranian nuclear program talks should come first. At least we'll see with the United States and coalition partners, where investigations can take place about Iran's enriched uranium procurement. As of right now, we have the International Atomic Energy Association, which has filed annual reports about Iran's program, that there isn't any threat at the current time. Now, I would say to you that if Iran wanted to build a nuclear missile, I think it's wise to do so, because the very countries who are telling them not to build a nuclear bomb are the very countries that have advocated war toward the Middle East for the past 100 years. And to see the United States and Israel, with the United States having the second most nuclear weapons in the world, and Israel, who doesn't allow vetting of their nuclear stockpile, have anywhere between 60 to 80. The hypocrisy in not having Arabs, or in this case, the Persians, to not have any defensive capabilities, which is this is what this is quite obvious to anyone who is following the stories out of the Middle East. And with the continued aggression showed by the Gulf, led by Saudi Arabia, and Israel and the United States toward Iran, says much. Now, all you have to do is take a look at Syria, for example, and look who the United States and Israeli are targeting. They're targeting allegedly terrorist outposts. But those terrorists are the very people who are fighting against the Salafists, which are the Persian and Syrian armies fighting against groups like the Islamic State Levant, Jabhat al-Nusra, Harar al-Sham, and a coalition of other al-Qaeda-backed affiliates. And they made no secret that Israel is actually aiding the Salafists in their fight against the Assad government. Now, why? When it is the consistent declaration from the Salafi jihadists to destroy Israel, are they trying to help them in their fight against Iranian affiliates in Lebanon, in Syria? And it's basically a multifaceted operation headed by the United States, the Gulf, and Israel. because they see the Iranian, Lebanon, Syria trio as much more of a threat to the regional allies, and they are not a threat. Iran is not a threat to Israel. I mean, if you're going to believe that, oh, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that they're going to use it on Israel, well, guess what? That would mean that Iran just committed suicide. Now, make no mistake, the mullahs are indeed intolerable people, but that doesn't make up the majority of that country. They're no more intolerable than, say, the government, the federal government of the United States, who have killed far more people than the mullahs in Iran. And I haven't seen Iran conduct a war with any country unlike the United States has. So if we're going to make comparisons, there is none. The United States has ever been as guilty as any other country in the world, even more so. With the insistence of conducting operations in Syria, you're going to have a large-scale war between the Shia and the Sunni-backed Gulf, which has its partners in the evangelical and Zionist Israel's, evangelical Christians in America, Zionist Israelis in Israel, the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And this is the real axis of evil that I've said before many times. And I think we need to wake up to the fact that this just might happen, this war. And the people who are going to suffer from it isn't going to be Israel. It's not going to be Saudi Arabia. It's going to be two countries, multiple anyway, United States, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. For the United States, to the military who are going to be killed in this just absolute useless war, and as well as economically. For the Middle East, a continued bombardment and a continued fracture of any type of hegemony for the future.